Can we have a round of applause for all of our panelists, Bassem, Calev, Michael, and Emily Huff. Now, Emily is the only one of these that I haven't read out her bio, and they ran out of room in the program. So I'm just going to talk about her as my friend, which she is. This is Emily, everybody. Her husband, Travis, is here as well. He's putting chairs on the stage. And those of you that knew Emily before she married Travis, you might recognize the name Emily Emmanuel. Emily Emmanuel, now it's Emily Huff, is a British Jew, and she has done more to help young Jewish believers and even people who aren't Jewish here in Israel, here in England, understand what God is doing in Israel of anybody. So can we have a round of applause, especially for Emily, but for the rest of the panel. Okay, here's how we're going to do this. We have not got much time, and we are sticking to 45 minutes. If we can get 45 minutes on the clock, that would be really great. I am so keen that your questions get answered that we have done two things. Number one, we have taken over 50 questions that have been posted in the QR code thing. We have consolidated them down into 5 themes. And those 5 themes, we're going to cover them as quickly as we can right now so that we can do the proper hand up if you have a question that hasn't been answered yet, or maybe a nuance to what we've already covered. And we would love to come to you. And guess who our roving Mike is today? Probably the man who is most passionate of you having your answers, your questions answered. Ladies and gentlemen, Harry Goring. We'll get to that in just a second. So, question number 1 for the panel. If it's okay, guys, we're not going to have time for everybody to answer. So you just got to choose really quickly who's going to answer and give quick answers. All right, here we go. Number 1, what/who is Israel? Israel has been used throughout these talks to mean a lot of things: a political state, an ethnic people, the olive tree of believing Jews and Gentiles, and the people of God. Given that tribal identity is contested and estimates of Jewish heritage range from 0.3% to 3%, depending on definition, how should we define Israel? And does the answer change depending on context? Calev Myers.
Thank you for giving me the easy one.
Yes.
Let me start by pointing out that I believe that there is spiritual Israel and there is physical Israel. And sometimes they're not mutually exclusive. And it's quite all right for the church to look at the prophecy in Ezekiel 36 and 37 and use it to preach about revival in a certain city in Great Britain. That's fine. And that's the spiritual fulfillment of those prophecies. But there's also a very physical fulfillment. And I think many times it's not either or, it's both and. And I would say that physical Israel, if the question is what is physical Israel, right? Because there is spiritual Israel. There is. It's both and, in my opinion. One is not a Jew who's circumcised outwardly, but inwardly. And so Israel, there is a greater spiritual Israel. But who is physical Israel, I would say, comes down to 2 things. First of all, there's a historical test, because there is one group of people that prayed next year in Jerusalem for the last 2,000 years and met in synagogues from generation to generation, and that's very, very strong historical proof. Were there other families that married in and integrated and so on and so on? Of course, there always is, but there was a strong historical tradition that was kept from generation to generation, family to family. If you ask me, what is Israel, though, I think it's like a table that stands on 4 legs. There is a biological leg, there's a cultural leg, there's a national leg, and there's also a connection to the land of Israel. You have to have at least 3 of those 4 legs to be part of Israel. That's my humble opinion, but yeah, maybe someone else could help with that as well.
Anything different from Bassem?
We may say, because, in reality, the thing that unites the Jews is the land of Israel, not Judaism even. Because many of them are very secular. So all the Jews come and relate to this land. And we don't have to look at it from the political side, but it's the connection between the Jews and the land together. in my opinion.
Great. It's a great answer. And guys, the second one kind of ties in with it. Biblical Israel versus the modern state. What is the biblical basis for viewing the modern state of Israel as uniquely significant in God's purposes, given that its borders were established through human political processes? And is there a danger that conflating the biblical and political meanings of Israel entangles theology with geopolitics, prioritizing place over people? Bassem started to answer that. Have you got a different answer for that, or is it the same? Michael?
I'll comment on this. I think all throughout the Bible, God did divine things through human means. And not always were the human means perfect. So we had a lot of kings of Israel. Not all of our kings were very good. That doesn't mean that God's not working still in the midst of other leaders. So the original question was, what was the difference between biblical Israel and the modern day state of Israel? Calev did a great job explaining this. For the first time ever that we know of, in 2,000 years, you have Jewish people returning to the land, speaking a modern version of the same language. They've been praying next year in Jerusalem, coming together in a modern state. We see that, many of us, we would see that as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. That doesn't justify always the means that it took to get there. Doesn't mean that everything was done perfectly, but we see God working through human leaders, sometimes leaders that serve and follow him, sometimes leaders that didn't. God used King Cyrus to send the Jews back to Israel after the Babylonian exile. So we see God working through sometimes flawed leaders to accomplish his purposes, but his purpose and his strand remains the same. So what would I say? I think sometimes we do mix up. When we say we want to love Israel and the Jewish people, we say that it has to mean the political state. I think we can separate those things as well. We're talking about the people of Israel. Every speaker that's come up here said, we're not a perfect people. We're not a perfect nation. We may be flawed. But at the same time, God's strand throughout history and his promises remain the same. And he's faithful to us in spite of ourselves. So I think sometimes we can equate the political state with the people of Israel and the call that God has on Israel. And God's never mixed those two things up. We've always had imperfect leaders all throughout the generations.
All right, guys, I thought there were only 5 questions. There's 12 questions. So we'll do these really, really quick. Question number 3, replacement versus fulfillment theology. Emily, I'm coming to you. Who I forgot to say you work for Eagles Wings. I'm wearing an Eagles Wings shirt right now.
You are, yes.
Sorry, I forgot about that. She leads tours still to Israel. For you, replacement fulfillment theology. If Jesus fulfills the law, temple, priesthood, sacrifices, and Davidic kingship, and if Romans 9 verse 8 says the true children of Israel are children of the promise, and Hebrews 11 says Abraham himself was looking for a heavenly rather than physical homeland, why would the land promise alone remain unfulfilled in Christ? And is what's being presented here actually distinct from fulfillment theology?
Well, that's an interesting question because I was just talking about that with someone here outside. And yeah, it does talk about that in Romans 11, but we were opening our Bible today just outside, and I was asking the person who's reading that to read the context of it. And the context is that God's call and promises are irrevocable. So it's not dependent necessarily on, the Jewish people's acceptance of Jesus, because actually there's been a partial blindness and there's been a hardening of heart for the sake of the Gentiles to come in. So God's calling and his covenant with Israel isn't dependent on them accepting Jesus, that land covenant. And it's actually for the sake of salvation, is what we were talking about. So when Calev was talking about the prophecies in Ezekiel, there is a plan of salvation for the Jewish people, and that includes them being restored to the land. It's a physical restoration before a spiritual restoration. So I believe that, it's not about like the difference between or difference of, like, God is going to move within the Jewish people's hearts, and it says in Romans that all Israel will be saved, but there is the land physical restoration before that.
Yeah, very quick.
I'd like to say that the minor prophets in scriptures, at least in Hebrew thought, are really thought as one book. And so if I was to ask you the prophecy about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem in Micah, was that physical or spiritual? Was he physically born in Bethlehem? Would you, yes? Okay. The prophecy in Zechariah about his feet coming down and landing on the Mount of Olives, is that spiritual or physical? It's physical, right? Like you would believe that he's supposed to come back to the Mount of Olives, right? So you can't look at these prophets and say, well, when it's speaking about certain things, it's physical land, but when it's talking about the nation of Israel coming back to their homeland after all these years of dispersion, that's spiritual, because you're picking and choosing. So for the sake of intellectual integrity, it's either or. Either all of this is just allegory, or there's actually a very physical plan of God for the land of Israel.
Right, I know you guys have stuff you want to say. We're going to keep it quick. Number 4, Gentiles, adoption, and the people of God. The New Testament applies Israel's covenant language to a multi-ethnic community. 1 Peter 2:9, Galatians 3, Ephesians 2. And all believers are adopted through Christ, who alone is the unique Son of God. How then do we understand the claim that ethnic Jewish believers are real sons while Gentiles are adopted in? What ongoing theological significance does ethnic distinction carry within the one people of God? Michael, you probably spoke
Yeah,
this one.
I'll comment on this. The verse that probably is most often used in this is saying there's no longer Jew or Greek or male or female or slave or free. I happen to be very grateful that my wife still has distinctions over the male gender. I happen to appreciate that there's distinction. So I don't think Paul's point is that there's no longer men or women or Jew or Gentile. What he's saying is that the scriptures you referenced is that the new covenant believers, the Gentiles, have now been grafted in, as we've been talking all throughout this event, to the promises of Israel. They're fellow co-heirs. They're equal in the sight of God in terms of value, but distinct in purpose. Sometimes we mix up, we think that unity requires us all to look the same. Well, that's not unity, that's uniformity. Actual unity requires diversity. And so what Jesus is talking about, what the Paul talks about, is this idea in Ephesians 2 of the dividing wall of hostility torn down between Jews and Gentiles, and this idea of one new man. So the body of Christ, the bride that I believe Jesus is coming back for, is made up of every tongue, every tribe, every people, every language, and it includes Jews and Gentiles. And there's a distinction there, not in terms of value, but we're equal in value but distinct in purpose, I would say it that way. So it's important to say that where do we get the idea that we're the natural sons versus the adopted sons? Well, that's straight out of Romans 11 I spoke today. There's natural olive branches and there's wild olive branches. And we may not like the sound of that. I mean, it sounds like I'd rather be a natural olive branch than a wild olive branch. But this is language that's used in the scriptures to explain. It doesn't mean we're less valuable. Doesn't mean we're less valuable in the family of God. But there are different roles. And the older brother has a different role than the rest of the children.
Great. Number 5, we're going to come to Bassem, if that's all right. Abraham's covenant, promises, and blessing. What is the difference between the promise and the blessing given to Abraham, and where does Ishmael fit? God made promises to his descendants too. So how do those relate to the covenant with Isaac and the broader story of Israel? Somebody's been paying attention.
Well, I think it's summarized by when Abraham prays to God, let Ishmael live before you. And then God says something very strange. He says a verse that when I look at it, it seems that it shouldn't be there. He says, but Isaac that will come from you, well, my covenant will be with him. And then he says, I will bless Ishmael, and he will have 12 tribes, and he will thrive. But my covenant will be with Isaac again. So I said to myself, you should tell him, I will bless Ishmael, but my covenant will be with Isaac. He says it twice, and the way I look at it is the blessing of Ishmael comes in understanding God's order in the different roles that he gave Ishmael and Isaac. In other words, when Abraham says, let Ishmael live before you, is as if he's saying, let him be saved. In order for him to be saved, the Messiah has to come from Isaac and to save him. So we have to understand God's order, that he has place for everyone. And by the way, adopted children have more rights than natural children. That's what Paul basically is saying. because in the Roman law, if you adopt a child, you cannot disavow the child. So God can cut the original branches, but he cannot cut the adopted ones, so to say. Of course he can. But I mean, they are not any better. There are different roles in the body, and God for sure has blessing and part in his family for Ishmael.
All right, we're doing good so far. Let's keep it really quick. Number 6, Jewish salvation. If Jesus is the only way to salvation and is himself fully God, how can those who reject him as Messiah be said to worship the same God? And what does all Israel will be saved actually mean? Who is included, and how does it connect to the return of Christ? Emily or Caleb? Yeah.
This ties into a very frequently asked question, which is, if Jews are so smart, why don't they believe in Jesus? I don't know if any of you, because look, at the end of the day, if you want to send a snail mail to somebody, you need to put almost nobody does this anymore, but about 7 different words of identification. So your street number, the street name, the city, the country, the zip code, whatever, 5 or 6 things. Postage stamp, thank you, Michael. There are 333 prophecies that point to Jesus. So how are the Jews missing this? And what's happening with them? I think it's very important to note that both Isaiah, Jesus, Paul all talk about a period of blindness. In the calling of Isaiah, when he sees this vision and the train of God fills the temple, I want a prophet to speak for me. And he says, Hineni shlacheni, here I am, send me. God says, this is what I want you to prophesy. Blindness, deafness, hardness of heart. Isaiah says, all right, how long will this last? He says, until this stump is burnt down to a small stump, there'll be a sprout of life in it, indicating that a tree will be cut down, but in the end, it'll grow back. Jesus, when he was telling the parable of the sower, I think it was in Matthew 7, and his disciples said to him, why do you speak in parables? He said, well, didn't you read Isaiah? That eyes that cannot see, ears that cannot hear, a heart that's too dull to understand. I've hidden these things from the wise and prudent. That's your answer to, if Jews are so smart, why can't they see Jesus? I've hidden these things from the wise and prudent, revealed them unto babes, which are the humble, the broken, the needy, etc. And then Paul talks about the blindness, which you mentioned, Michael, that I wouldn't have you be ignorant of this mystery, Romans chapter 11, that blindness part has happened till all Israel be saved, etc. So we're in a period of blindness. When you share your faith with a Gentile and they can't believe, maybe they've been blinded by the devil. If you share your faith with a Jewish friend, they can't believe, they've been blinded by God. That's very difficult for some of us to get our minds around, but it's important to see that, and important to see that even in their blindness, God is using them and God loves them. And I think that's very important. But the exciting thing is that it says that eventually that blindness will be removed. The only place, just for those of you who are interested, that it says it'll be removed in the Hebrew scriptures is at the end of Ezekiel 39. So this is after the war of Gog and Magog, which arguably is Russia, Iran, Turkey, maybe Sudan, some of the countries that are mentioned. That's where they'd be today. God brings them down to Israel to judge them. And at the end of that chapter it says, and then I will hide my face from them no longer. So we see in all these scriptures, there's a period of blindness, that blindness will be removed. And even though the Jewish people can't see that today, God still loves them and has a good plan for them.
Wow.
Can I comment quickly on this?
Super quick, yeah.
So Calev did a great job on answering the question about the return of Jesus, the end times, what do we see? I'm not going to comment indefinitely. What does all Israel will be saved mean? In short, I don't know, and I don't know that anyone knows. Most would agree that it would be in a large part of Jewish people recognizing and accepting Jesus as the Messiah. I'm going to give just an Old Testament and a New Testament reference. Zechariah chapter 12, written before Jesus came on the scene, talks about the day of the Lord and talks about that the Son of Man, the Messiah will come and put his feet on the Mount of Olives, and it talks about everyone will see him, especially those who pierced him. They'll see him and they'll weep bitterly on behalf of him whom they've pierced. And then, of course, we know that to be talking about Yeshua, Jesus. And they would weep as one weeps for a firstborn son. You heard me share earlier today, Matthew 23, Jesus saying to the Jewish religious leaders, you're not going to see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Until Jews are back in Jerusalem and are welcoming Jesus back, he ties his return really to that. And then finally, in Revelation 1, chapter 6, we see John referencing back to Zechariah. And he says, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. So there's this idea that the return of Jesus culminates with Jewish people, his original brothers and sisters, those who were pierced, acknowledging and accepting him. So again, I don't know exactly what that looks like. I would say we're already starting to see more Jewish people come to faith today in the last 80 years than we did in the last 2,000 years. But we do know that as we get closer and closer to Jesus' return, that is one of the prerequisites he set. I didn't choose it. He set for his return.
Okay, number 7. Well done, guys. The Israel-Palestine conflict. Christian response and critique. God rebuked Israel for injustice throughout the Old Testament, and we are called to grieve with all those who suffer. Given the horrors of both October 7th and the devastation in Gaza, and given that some speakers here have described these events as evidence of God's faithfulness to Israel, how do Christians engage with this conflict in a way that is theologically coherent without being uncritical of either side or repaying evil with evil? Emily, you haven't talked for a while.
Well, I was in Israel on October 7th. I got married 3 days after October 7th in Israel. Michael was at the wedding. And so it really massively affected me because I've never seen that kind of injustice. I've never seen that kind of just horrificness since the Holocaust and that level of anti-Semitism. So I myself found it really, as a believer and as someone who loves Jesus and loves the Palestinians and has many Palestinian friends, I found it very hard to know honestly how to pray and how to respond. But I did find myself, we do have to pray for our enemies and love our enemies, and no matter who your enemy is. So if your enemy is the Jewish people in Israel, we are meant to respond in love and vice versa. So I think that first and foremost, we need to pray for both sides. And secondly, ask the Lord what his heart is, because that's what I did. And he gave me Isaiah 52, and Isaiah 52 talks about actually the salvation of Israel. And like Michael said, we're actually seeing a lot of Jewish people come to faith during this time. And I believe that actually God is using a devastating moment and bringing light to this conflict. And so pray in love for both sides, and absolutely don't fight evil with evil. We're not called to do that in any situation for any conflict.
I want to give a very human answer to this. We have 2 sons, 5-year-old and 3-year-old. Our 3-year-old son was about 9-10 months old when October 7th happened. He was actually the same age as the youngest hostage that Hamas took, Kfir Bibas, that was killed later in captivity. So I every time I look at him and I see his age, I see how old the youngest hostage would be. So most of our kids' lives have been at war. And how do you explain to your 3-year-old and 5-year-old when ballistic missiles are being fired? I mean, they didn't understand everything. They thought the terrorists were in the ballistic missiles and they're going to take you hostage when they land. Like they didn't understand everything. But how do you keep it from perpetuating down? Those in the IDF, there are sons and daughters and brothers and sisters, and several of our friends had children that were killed, people we know personally. It's all very near and close to home, less than an hour away from where we live. So I say that to say we have to change the cycle of hatred by how we teach our children. You heard Mati last night. How do we pass this down to our children? So I'm proud that now our kids will say, man, we're praying that God would change the hearts of the people that hate us, and they would change their hearts so that they love and not hate. Like, we know only Jesus can change their heart, but we have to pass that down. And it's difficult when you see friends that are killed, etc. You have to acknowledge that there's legitimate pain that on both sides. You can't be numb to pain. You can't say, my pain is more valid than someone else's pain, but be willing to listen, be willing to care, and being willing to be countercultural and not fall into the polarizing of one side versus the other.
If I could just add one very short thought. Please remember this. In order to support Israel, you should not be anti-Palestinian. And in order to support the Palestinians, you should not be anti-Israeli. If we all believe that each people has the highest inherent value on their lives because both are created in the image of God, we as believers should always be looking for solutions that improve the quality of life of both peoples on both sides of the conflict.
Yes, and Bassem, yeah, you can clap for that. Bassem, your daughter would like you to answer this question as well.
Well, there is some theological problem with most of the verses they use from the Old Testament that is talking about mishpat. Mishpat means justice in the context of a court, because judgment, as court judgments, were God asked from Israel to bring justice in the context of a court. And there are other verses that are talking about tzedek, which is righteousness, and that's a different thing. In the New Testament, the word mishpat, judgment, happened, repeated only 3 times, and concerning God alone, judging the unjust. And the verses that we see, it's verses that we are supposed to do righteousness, meaning to stand with the one that is weeping and to weep with him. They take verses that are out of context, that God stands with the orphan, with the widow. Yes, stand of mercy, not mishpat. And you see also verses that are talking about, in other words, we can stand with our nations, of course, a stand of mercy, but not to say who's right and who's wrong. This is for the Lord, and that's, we need to be careful.
Can we clap for that too? That was awesome. Okay, we're only gonna do 1 or 2 more like this, and then we're gonna get the master microphone. Okay, Zionism and political critique of Israel. Is it possible to criticize the actions of the Israeli government, including civilian casualties the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, itself acknowledges, without that being anti-Semitic? What do you make of Zionism as a movement, and how do Christians keep their primary allegiance to Christ's kingdom rather than any earthly nation state?
It is absolutely possible to criticize the Israeli government. We as Israelis do it every day, many times a day. It's our bread and butter. And just because you criticize Bibi Netanyahu or the government of Israel or whoever's in charge does not make you anti-Semitic, period. Zionism, in its purest definition, is the belief that the Jewish people have the right to national self-determination in their ancestral homeland. And so it's completely compatible with biblical thought, with Christianity. There's a lot of Christian Zionists in the world that are Catholic and Greek Orthodox, obviously many evangelicals. If you believe that the Jews have the right to national self-determination, just like the British and the Irish and the Scottish and whoever, then you're a Zionist, whether you want to admit that or not. And so I think that, and if you also believe that the fulfillment of, that you don't have to believe in biblical Zionism. You can be a supersessionist. You don't have to take the position of most of the people that appear on this stage, but you can still have a belief that the Jews have a right to national self-determination like every other independent sovereign state in the world.
Yes.
I believe that I personally believe we shouldn't adopt any labeling. Christ is beyond that. If I even don't adopt the term anti-Semitism, I say anti-Jewish, Jewish hate, because all these terms, in my opinion, carry also another bags with them that we don't know what they are. Yes, I always say I believe all the promises, and I believe that the Jews have the right to the land, but I personally I'm not with adopting or attacking. It's the same thing, by the way, Zionism. That's my opinion, because it existed before Zionism and before anything.
And I'll just say this. Usually, I agree with Bassem. Sometimes the terms are hijacked by the minorities and the radical groups within our society. So what you see on the news sometimes, when you hear the word Zionism, you heard Calev's definition, but what we see is a very, very small segment of our society that most Israelis would probably not agree with in some of the behavior they have towards Palestinians, towards those in the West Bank, some of our politicians that are on the very, very fringes of our government. Every mainstream Israeli, I'm not talking about a believer, I'm talking about just mainstream Israelis on the street would say, how can they even be in our government? Those are the ones that are getting the airtime. And so I would just encourage you, just like probably your own British MPs and politicians, it's sometimes the loudest ones that get the most voices. That doesn't mean that they represent the majority. So I'd be careful about assuming they represent the majority.
Wow. Okay, we got a lot. We've come through a lot. I'm just going to ask one more, kind of a synopsis of some of these, and then we're going to let Harry rove with the mic. Loving both Israelis and Palestinians practically. Jesus calls us to love our neighbors across every ethnic and political boundary. What does that look like concretely for both Jewish people and Palestinians in the current climate without being co-opted by political agendas on either side? I think I'm just going to answer this really quickly, guys. We all represent different organizations who are doing exactly this as best we possibly can. Please just go through your program, look at the different ministries that we represent, or come ask us, come talk to us. And even people who aren't here on this panel, they're representing their own ministries as well. So please do come and ask us about that. The last one before Harry takes the mic around to you. By the way, be thinking and go ahead and put your hands up so Harry can see if you have a question. You got somebody right behind you here. Okay, number 10, Jesus' mission, the law, and the Sabbath. Jesus said he was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Yet his ministry regularly extended to Gentiles and outsiders, and he declared his house a house of prayer for all nations. How do we hold those together? And why does the Sabbath appear to be the one commandment of the 10 that Jesus did not explicitly reinforce in the New Testament? Controversial question. Some would say that he did. Emily.
Yeah, I would like to know how that came about, of how he didn't talk about the Sabbath, because I would argue that he did Sabbath with his disciples, and that every law in the Ten Commandments, to me, if I don't see it any way otherwise as equal. So to understand, I mean, the Sabbath came before the law. So forget, even if you want to talk about the law or not, God rested on the seventh day. It was in the book of Genesis. So there is a Sabbath rest, like it says in Hebrews, still today, and it's an invitation to either partake in it or not. But actually, it is a commandment that is still, I think, valid, and we can actually receive that from our own life. When we Sabbath, that we get replenished, and it's a blessing that God gave us for our own spiritual health.
Yeah, great. The other topics that we haven't covered based on these: Jewish traditions and Christian practice, scholarly interpretation, and anti-Jewish bias, which is what you were saying we should call it as well. Harry Goring, would you please go? I think it's Thomas, is that right?
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for everything thus far. I'm sure all of us here will agree that Israel and the situation in the Middle East needs a huge amount of prayer globally. The Bible says so very much when it says in Psalm 122, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. As leaders in the body of Messiah in Israel, what is your biggest prayer request, and how can we as a nation, as representatives of the church in this country, grow in that area, both personally and corporately?
Great question.
Well, pray for the shepherds of the churches on both sides, the Arab side and the Jewish side, because that's the creme de la creme of what Jesus is doing in his kingdom, that people get saved. And so that's what we need to really focus on: the flock, minister, have heart, purity and sincerity in our service, pray. So that's the main result that Jesus is waiting for. Yes, it's good to do humanitarian work, to do hasbara, to do all sorts of things, to fight in the evil we see around us as well. But at the end of the day, if it didn't bear salvation for the nation, both nations, then so pray for the church in both sides, the Arab side and the Israeli side.
Yes, Harry, can we get one from around the middle? Is that all right? Harry's coming to the middle. If you have a question around the middle, go ahead and put your hand up really high, and we'll do our best to answer. Yes, perfect.
Just so I can understand, like, from the Bible's perspective, like, Jewish people nowadays, are they, like, descendants of the kingdom of Judah or also Samaritans? You know how there was a split? Can someone explain that to me?
Yeah, but so by and large, there are two tribes of Israel that survived the Babylonian dispersion: the Levites and the tribe of Judah. By and large, there are some Levites who were left in the land when the rest of the people went out to Babylon. But it was basically the tribe of Judah that came back, and that's why I think we use the word Jews or Jewish, because it's from the tribe of Judah. And when we also talk about the 10 lost tribes, those are all the tribes except for Judah and Levi. By the way, you also have names, certain names. So like Levi, Levi, Leviston, you have all these names of Jewish families that come from. Also Kohen. Kohen in Hebrew is priest. And so you have derivatives of that name. And from the tribe of Judah, there are a few names as well, such as Perez, Peretz, Perez. He was in the line of King David in the tribe of Judah. And so you have a lot of Jewish families that use those names. Those are basically when you're talking about Jews today, that's what you're talking about kind of at the tribal level.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Harry's around the middle, but he's running. Here he comes.
Hi. I just wanted to ask a question about if Jews who don't know Christ are truly the members of God's people. And I was just reading in Romans 9, verse 6 to 8, and verse 8 says, "This means that Abraham's physical descendants are not necessarily children of God. Only the children of the promise are considered to be Abraham's children." And so my question really is, well, when I read that, I feel as though it's saying that not all Jews, as in unsaved Jews, are a part of God's family now, because they were the natural branches that were cut off, and they need to be grafted in again, like through evangelism and accepting Jesus. But actually God's people now, the people who are truly members of God's people, are the ones that are in Christ. So do you believe that unsaved Jews are still God's people? Or, yeah, that's kind of my question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I didn't get through all of Romans 9 to 11, so I apologize for that. Calev spoke to this a little bit earlier. You do have spiritual Israel and physical Israel, but it's important to know what God's talking about at any given point. God made a covenant with Abraham, confirmed it to Isaac and Jacob, and said, "This is for all your generations." In Jeremiah, it says, if the heavens, when the sun stops rising and setting, then my covenant with Israel is going to be going away, right? So basically saying, as long as the sun keeps rising, the sun keeps setting, my covenant stays the same. So we would look at that towards the physical people of Israel. But if you read Romans 4, it talks about the faith of Abraham. Abraham believed that he was justified through his faith. So I do believe that not all, as Romans 9 verse 6 says, that not all who are descendant of Israel are descendants from Israel, you have a spiritual line of those who share the faith of their forefather Abraham. But when you go further down and you read about natural branches being cut off, those natural branches are the physical Israel that Calev was talking about earlier, physical Israel that was cut off, that are grafted back in because of their disobedience.
I'd like to add that I just think this whole conversation is very strange. There are many peoples of the world that have experienced expulsion. The Kurds, who else? The Romans, the Circassians, people that were dispersed, the Armenians, that they started in one national physical location and then were spread throughout the world. Not in any of the other cases would you take 60 of their books of history and say every time it says the Kurds, they're actually talking about the church. Or every time it says the Armenians, they're talking about the church. Why is Israel the only country that people feel like they have a right to completely erase our national identity and to make us an allegory rather than something that actually exists? It's an interesting question, okay? And I actually think the answer to that question comes from one of the curses that were spoken over Israel in Deuteronomy 28, verse 37, that says, "Because of your sins, you'll be cast out of the country into all the nations, and you'll become a parable." and a byword. What is a parable? It's a story that you tell that in order to express a deeper truth. It's not a real thing. It's a make-believe. And God said, because of your sins, I'm going to make you a parable. Supersessionism, replacement theology, is the fulfillment of biblical prophecy itself, because it's something that God said would happen. Wow. But the same God that promised that we would become a parable also promised 100 times in scriptures that he would return us to the land. And so both the fact that we became a parable and the fact that we've come back to the land speak of the faithfulness of God.
Wow. Yep.
I got a question about the church traditions and Jewish traditions. I was just wondering what your take is on the Jewish traditions that we as Christians, should we be practicing any of them? How should our attitude be to them? Like, would you encourage us to be celebrating Passover or other Jewish festivals? Would love to know.
Yeah, I want to comment on that. I think a lot of times we ask the question, do I have to celebrate Passover? Do I have to celebrate the Jewish festivals? And the Bible makes it very clear, we don't have to do any of that to earn salvation. So I want to be very clear about that. But I think we're asking the wrong question.
Yeah.
I'm from Canada originally. I married my wife, Vanessa, who's from America. We both are now Israeli citizens. She fell in love with me, and then she came to Canada to meet my family. And she said, I loved you before, but when I went to your hometown and I met your family and I learned the traditions and where you came from, I loved you in a deeper way. And if we really want to love Yeshua, Jesus, wouldn't we want to go to his hometown, to his family members, the people that share the same traditions, to experience some of the things he experienced? Not because we have to, because we want to know him deeper. The feast and festivals are something Jesus observed from a young age. He celebrated Passover. He celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles. He visited Jerusalem. He visited these places. He was called to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And so I think sometimes we ask the question, do I have to? And that's like asking someone, if someone's giving you a gift, do you say, do I have to open it? Do I have to open it? You know, Emily talked about the Sabbath. The Sabbath, the fourth commandment, is the one commandment that Christians brag about breaking. The 110 commandment where we brag, oh yeah, I work really hard, I work on the Sabbath. And it's not something we have to do for salvation, no. But it's something that God is giving us as a gift. So I would say, in an effort to want to know God more, I'd want to know his calendar. I'd want to know his feast. I think Jeff was sharing earlier today, would we recognize Jesus if he came into our churches and he was talking about, we have the Feast of Shavuot. Does anyone know what Shavuot is, the significance? Every feast and festival that was entrusted to Israel to steward and pass down over the years, Jesus has fulfilled or will fulfill at some point in the future.
I just want to speak into that because a couple of you have been to some of my Passovers and Sukkot meals here. And for me, understanding the feast, which actually the word feast is moed, which means appointed time, was pivotal in me understanding actually it felt like my faith wasn't just built on kind of feathers. It was actually built on like an ongoing story, and that, understanding the Passover gave me depth to understanding my own salvation and my own baptism. So when I celebrate Passover, lead Passovers for believers, or Feast of Tabernacles for believers, I'm excited to invite them into a deeper level of God's story and like them understanding more of who he is and more of Jesus is. But we don't have to, just like Michael said. But it's great. It builds our faith. Why not? And just one thing, we don't know when Jesus was born. We really don't. It wasn't the 25th. We really don't know. But we do know when he was crucified. It's the one date in the Bible we do know when he was crucified, and it was the 14th of Nisan. And so why would you not want to celebrate? Why would we not want to actually mark that day when we actually know when that is?
Okay, guys, we are drastically out of time, and so I'm just going to ask for this one more question, and then Harry, after he's asked his question, while we answer, you get the final question of the day. That's for Harry himself. What is this question?
I wanted to ask, notwithstanding the terrible tragedy and evil that was October the 7th, how does the panel respond to those who believe that the response from Israel in terms of the Gaza war was also disproportionate and involved evils? And what does the panel think the future for Gaza is at this point?
Probably the most political question we've asked of the whole day.
obviously, this is a question with a lot of layers of complexity. You asked about disproportionate force. That concept is very, very difficult to define, because proportionate force would have been sending 3,000 soldiers over to the other side to rape, burn families alive, kill innocent civilians, and then kidnap 255 of them and put them in tunnels underneath Israel. I don't think that's what you mean when you say we should have used proportional force. So, thank you. So what is proportional force? Proportional force is using, let's say, the minimal amount of ancillary civilian casualties necessary to neutralize a clear and present danger. And I think, as somebody who has served in the military, and we have many friends here, Mati, who spoke earlier, I think he's done like 300 days of reserve duty over the last, hope I'm not divulging a state secret, Mati, but the extent to which the IDF goes in order to keep international war laws, in order to warn civilians to leave certain areas because Hamas is there and they're going to go in and do this. The amount of operations that are stalled or stopped because we know that a child is in the building. The IDF, many objective groups have said that no other army in the world has taken more precautions in order to save civilian lives on the other side of the conflict. Have they done enough? Probably not, because we're talking about unrepentant and imperfect people that make human mistakes, and we regret that, and we regret all the pain of innocent. So every innocent Palestinian child that has passed because of this war is a terrible tragedy. Every loss of a human life is a loss of a whole world. I think our government, our army, is trying to do its best in a very complex situation where you have militants that are embedded deep in civilian infrastructure, where you have whole cities and neighborhoods that are booby-trapped, and that's the reason that you see so much destruction of property, because basically you cannot go into those areas without losing soldiers because all the buildings are booby-trapped. It's not easy. It's the most complex warfare situation that has ever happened, according to many, many experts. 400 to 500 kilometers of tunnels underneath civilian infrastructure, and military operations taking place from hospitals. Very difficult. Do we do a perfect job? Absolutely not. Does Israel do its best? I think so.
We're going to let Bassem answer as well. Bassem?
Just to add, in one of the most dense populated area on earth, like, it's so hard. You know, when the Americans went to Iraq, they had the ratio 1 to 19 to take one from the militias to 19 civilians. Israel did, I think, something like 50% or one of three. That I think it's, and it's true, by the way, when the first hostages were released, the BBC did a digitalized count of the Hamas militias, and they counted, the computer counted 1,500 fighters. And let's assume another 1,500 were in tunnels. So 3,000, 5,000. They were 40,000. But the media says that all of them are civilians, of course, and all of them are children, and this is not true. But of course, they were recruiting all the time with food. We know from all our believers in Gaza. So they come to the house, instead of your mother standing for hours, you just come with us and the food will come to your house. You don't have to stand in line to take food, and so on and so forth.
And Bassem, really quickly remind us of your vision of the future of Gaza.
Future of Gaza will have tens of churches. I have seen a vision of people being, thousands were baptized in the sea, really. And they are the most opened among all the Palestinians, by the way. I know this because of our media responses. Always the most positive responses comes from Gaza.
Amen. Harry, thank you so much for hosting us, and please give us the final question of the session. We're already about 3 minutes over, so we'll keep it short.
Well, thank you so much for the panel and for the questioners for the dignity and respect with which you have answered these difficult questions. Some of them, I deeply appreciate that. And thank you for giving me this job. I don't know why I've got this job, because this job is the roving mic job, is the job that is given to the junior office trainee on their first day. And I've loved doing it. Thank you so much. My very quick question is, as I leave this place and people say, you've been on this weekend, what was it all about? What is a sort of quick answer to that?
Emily.
Discovering a deeper sense of God's heart, so discovering a different angle of God's heart. I think that actually meeting Israelis and Palestinians, a lot of people I know have watched a lot of media, consumed a lot of information, but they've not actually had a conversation with someone that has been in Israel, to Gaza, and to ask them what it's been like in the last 3 years. So I think meeting people in the land is so important.
Brilliant. Round of applause for our panel.